it's one of those very simple ideas that's rather hard to explain. The idea is that we get groups of people, mostly school students, but not exclusively, making short films about mostly practical science, right? So an awful lot of this sort of stuff happens, of people sitting around in school labs making films of bits and pieces. That, by the way, is a wave machine made out of gaffer tape stretched between two lab stools and kebab sticks spaced about a ruler width apart and jelly babies as masses on the ends of the kebab sticks, right? And it takes about, it costs you about 10 euros to assemble the bits. It takes about 20 minutes to make, and I'll swear it's as good as the ones you can buy for, 150 quid. It's absolutely fantastic. If you do a slightly longer run, you can measure the wave packet dispersion in it in one sweep. It's really quite lovely. Anyway, so the idea is people make films of these things, explaining how they work to their peers, or showing why they enjoy them or what they think is interesting about these things. We collect those films as a central resource. So they're there partly as a source of inspiration for practical work and for demonstrations, possibly to introduce things, to introduce subjects and topics in your lessons, and partly they're just plain fun, right? The rules for people entering the competition, because there's then, we try to celebrate the best films. The rules for people entering the competition are very simple. Films have to be no longer than 2.5 minutes. So if the film is boring, at least it's only dull for 2.5 minutes of your life, right? And you can do pretty much anything in 2.5 minutes. It's amazing how much ground you can cover and how hard it is to fill that time if you decide to go all the way. We get a lot of films that are about 1.5 minutes long, 1:45, something like that. So 2.5 minutes maximum, broadly about science, technology, engineering, maths, medicine, right? And that can be topics, issues, experiments, however you want to do it, and not boring, right? That's the key rule for me, is not boring. If the film is boring, then there's absolutely no point doing it. Nobody's going to watch it. For physics films, for films which might be recognized in the specifically physics category, the Institute of Physics apply an additional rule, which is that the film has to at least attempt to explain the physics involved. For other subjects, we don't have that stipulation, and it's a moot point as to whether we should or shouldn't in all of the categories. So the films vary tremendously, but I'll sort of finish off by showing you some of the films. What it looks like in practice is small groups, typically 4 or 5, works about right, working together to try and agree on what it is that they're attempting to achieve and get to the stage where they have something to show for their work. And you can imagine that the communication skills involved in doing this are fairly intensive. And it's not unusual to have a slightly fractious time with it, I think it's fair to say. But there are times when I think that's a very valuable experience. I mean, for me, I got that experience in doing the school play. It was always the big play in the school magazine to some extent. Bringing that sort of experience into the science lab is something that strikes me as being quite a big win. It's very hard to show that science and physics particularly, I think, is a creative endeavour. And it clearly is, but that's something that's rather difficult to reflect when you're hitting curriculum targets every week or whatever. So this is a massive cheat. By bringing in something that people already understand as being a creative process, filmmaking, at least we're letting that word be used and let those concepts out within the context of a school physics lab. So, having filmed something, there's then the sort of agonising over what you've got and what you haven't got. These two are smirking because the other half of the team has gone off to film the shot that they forgot to take. And, lots of discussion huddled around laptops, trying to work out how things go. Quite a lot of giggling over seeing yourself on camera. It's one of those things that it's hard to do, but children seem to relish the challenge. It's an odd one, but trying to get them to the stage where, offering them the opportunity to do this, they recognise that it's going to be hard, but they want to achieve the end result. So the satisfaction when they get there is quite strong. So over the 2 years we've been running, we've had about 300 films made, I think, in total now, all of which are on the website. And we try to recognise the best of those films every year at an annual award ceremony, which is it's more like a film award ceremony than a strict competition. So we allocate films into specific categories rather than people entering too carefully. This year, the awards were held at the Royal Institution in London, which is a fantastic venue. It's the home of experimental science in this sense. It's where I cut my teeth 20 years ago. The very first thing they asked me to do was rub mercury into foot-square zinc plates to make a model of a Grove cell by hand with a sort of Brillo pad thing. The fume cupboard hadn't worked since 1938. 5 years later, they wanted to change that lab, which had been in constant use since 1804, into a cafe. Now, I know how much mercury I spilt down the floorboards. And the cafe isn't there. The new cafe is downstairs, so that's either better or worse, depending on where you think the mercury's gone. But we had a fantastic time at the Royal Institution. It looks half empty, but that's because we'd crowded everybody into the bottom right-hand corner, which feels better when you're in the auditorium, looks rubbish on pictures we later discovered, which is a bit of a mistake. We'll learn from that one. And it was, did you have a good time, Declan? You came over?
Really good.
Was it all right?
Yeah, girls loved it. Yeah, it was great.
It was, because you've been finalists twice and not actually quite won it, and it's all a bit. But the standard of entries is dramatically better than I'd ever hoped, actually. They range from being very studious, very informative, very carefully prepared, to being completely insane. And judging one against the other is kind of impossible. But the overall picture that you get from the films is that 14, 15, 16-year-olds are incredibly bright and creative and inventive, and as I'm sure you're aware. So, you know, shiny trophies, which look a bit shinier than that if the screen shows it. Happy winners. I should point out, it's Kate Humble who was hosting this year, who's done a lot of presenting for the BBC. Jem Stansfield, second left. This is kind of funny. At the time, nobody knew who Jem Stansfield was. He's one of our judges. I worked with him about 10 years ago. He's now presenting BBC One's new flagship science series, which was being filmed at the time, but none of us could say that he was involved in it. So we just had to say, a guy you will recognise come the end of the year. And Louisa Balch next to him is used to commission science programmes for Channel 4. So we were very lucky to get these judges the first year round, and it was all a bit fraught the first year. We rang them up afterwards and said, really sorry, that was a mess. Would you mind, could we possibly ask you to do it next year? And every single one of them said, try and stop me, which is rather nice. And of course, it's all about happy winners. And indeed, happy winners' colleagues who've just discovered the concept of smoked salmon and aren't quite convinced. What sort of catering company served smoked salmon to primary school kids? I love that picture. To be fair, there were also sort of mini hot dogs and popcorn and all, and but the smoked salmon went down better than you'd expect. Maybe that says something about the catchment of schools we've attracted so far. But okay, so that's the kind of basic idea, that it's a film competition, but it's actually a little bit about trying to work out how to bring video into the science classroom. That this is something that children are doing anyway. That we started this 3 years ago, and at that point it was kind of unusual for children to film bits and pieces of their lives, but it's now absolutely routine for them to pick up their mobile phone and stick something on YouTube 20 minutes later. So they're doing this. The question is there any value to us in using those skills that they already have? There's something about the basic kind of theatrical demonstration, the kind of thing that you see in the Christmas lectures every year from the Royal Institution, that I think lends itself...